just hand it over to Jason. Is it Kunesh? Is that the best way to say your name?
Yeah,
Okay.
sure
Kunesh,
enough.
Jason Kunesh.
Hey,
You have the mic.
I do. Thanks, everybody, and thanks to Christian and Paul and Suzanne for inviting me out, and I'm extremely humbled to be here at Xerox PARC. It's incredible to be at ground zero of where a lot of what our industry is about started. So tonight I'm going to talk about politicos, geeks, and Kool-Aid drinkers and give you a few tall tales about design and what we did in the campaign. This is the first time I'm giving this talk, so it's going to be a little rough and ready. My Twitter handle is down there at the bottom. If there's things that you like, don't like, heard, didn't hear, want to know more about, feel free to hit me up. Love the feedback. So first of all, the title. I think we talked about it originally as True Believers and Kool-Aid Drinkers. And my friend Cecilia worked on a couple of campaigns. She worked on the Clinton campaign, Edwards and Kerry, through the years. And she told me, look out for these three types of people. And so I substituted geeks for true believers, because these are basically the three folks that we had in the campaign. The politicos were people who were career politicians, right? So they were there to get a House position, you know, to work in the Hill, to become somebody who actually worked within governance, you know, within the system itself. And the Kool-Aid drinkers, you know, this was a campaign term that was used to talk about people who were really believed in a candidate, right? And so it's sort of a derogatory term, and it was used that way a lot in the past, I think, you know, for candidates who maybe didn't inspire people as much as they could have, you know, like Kerry or folks like that. One of the great things about the campaign, one of the common touchstones, is that we were all Kool-Aid drinkers. And if there's one thing that kind of pulled us together, it was that we believed in the candidate because he was an easily believable person, because he really is as advertised. So in the middle, you have geeks, and that was something that was completely new for this campaign. The technology team I was a part of was the first one of its kind in presidential history. I was one of the first UX practitioners on a campaign, and so it was a unique opportunity that I was humbled to be a part of and would like to share with you a little bit of it tonight. So we'll talk a little bit about the campaign, what it means. The campaign is a $1 billion 18-month effort. Right? And the goal is basically there's one success metric, and you don't really know anything about whether you're directly mapping to that metric or not. Right? You don't have a predictive idea, you know, a month ahead of time as to how you're actually doing. You can look at other factors to try to predict, you know, whether what you're doing is on target. This is the office the day I started. There was about 30 people there. Eventually, we'd grow to about 800 people just in the campaign headquarters. It was located in Chicago. I put this slide next because one of the things that happened was as you're getting these politicos and geeks all together for the first time, there's a lot of sort of mistrust, because you've got on the one side people who've worked within the political process for a long time. You had people who had tracked back together from Howard Dean, who was sort of the first real true progressive national candidate. And so you had people who pretty much knew each other. They knew the landscape, they knew what they were about, and they also knew that this was the end of the road for them, right? This was the last time that they would actually work on a re-election campaign. And so they looked at us, showing up for the first time, coming from industry, as a bunch of people that maybe didn't, you know, quite get the trust that we should have had initially, but it was something that we had to earn. And one of the things I'd like to talk with you about tonight is basically how we bridged that gap and came together to win. So a little bit about the campaign itself, because we can get into some of these differences right up front. This is the office chef, right? We later couldn't make pancakes at our desks because the building complained, but that's a whole other topic. This is our lovely daycare. That beer pong table down front there, that's actually a meeting room. And that wall back there, that's the way in which you keep track of projects. This is also, by the way, a conference room, believe it or not. In addition, this is something where you've got Winnie Lamb, who was a Googler, who came to help out towards the end of the campaign, and Leah Abraham, who took a sabbatical from Facebook to come help us. So we're sitting there thinking, my God, these poor people are having a meeting, like, you know, in a corner of the office, right? And all the people from sort of the field and traditional political side of the house are thinking, they've got projectors. Who is coddling these people? So again, the product roadmap. This is David Osborne, who was involved with a lot of the projects up there, looking at it a little confused by the fact that he's looking at stacks of Post-its on a wall that are actually telling him whether we're going in the right direction or not. This is campaign security. So whenever the press would come through, we would have to put these big bundles of paper up on the wall to hide the fact that we were actually building software. I'm not sure to this day why that happened, but it was definitely what we had to do. This is a product demo. I still get a little iffy on that one. But yeah, just trying to figure out how to actually talk about what we're doing and why it matters in the greater context. So let's talk about that context for a minute. The notion of a presidential campaign, the bottom line is that you need 270 electoral votes to win. Excuse me. There's a lot of different ways you can go about that. Some of the core things that the Obama campaign believed in were these. Number one, you campaigned in all 50 states. Right? Even the states you weren't likely to win in, you still organized in those states, because the notion is that you're doing more than just trying to win a campaign. You're trying to actually organize people to create change in their neighborhoods and communities. So that's first. The second is that you expand the electorate. So what that means is you get people to register to vote, you get people to turn out, and you make sure that they know that their votes are important and that they're working within their neighborhoods to create change. And the third part of that is that you invest in field and technology. So field means basically the volunteers within their community being supported by paid staffers and being organized to run a program in their state so that each one of the 50 states had its own unique program, and that program was responding to people within the community and volunteers so that it was actually tailored to that state. Now on the Romney side, that wasn't quite the strategy. It's not a strategy that you can easily use if you're running on some of the policies that they were. So their side, it was more of a targeted program of voter suppression through semi legal coordination with state houses, notably in Pennsylvania, Florida, and several other places. And while it was something that lawyers enjoyed, it generally was not maybe as healthy for the body politic as you'd like. The other thing that you do in his case is you carpet bomb TV ads across the nation, right? And you do that as much as you can to get out a message that is as palatable or as negative as you can possibly use to, basically convince people that you're a better choice. So for us, it came down to 5 things. We asked everybody across the country to do these 5 things in whatever way made the most sense for them. So like when Christian was talking earlier about like who are your users, our users were everybody. Like 51% of the country were our ideal user base, right? And in general, we wanted them to do these 5 things. We wanted them to register to vote, and if they'd registered, we wanted them to ask their friends to register to vote. We wanted them to be persuaded. So we wanted to either offer content that helped persuade people, or we wanted them to be able to have a conversation that was meaningful and in-depth so that they could share knowledge of why the policies and the platform we were running on was better for them and their community. We wanted to have them turn out to vote, and especially early voting, right? So the earlier votes you get, the better off it is for the candidate, the better it is in terms of sort of press and media spin, but more importantly, the better it is because once you've already early voted, you can then turn around, get out, and help your neighbors early vote. And so the whole thing sort of cycles. We also want people to donate because we're a campaign, we're a nonprofit, and we need to make money to actually run the whole thing. And we want people to volunteer. So basically, if you've done all this stuff up top, we want to make sure you're actually getting out in the field and having those conversations with people in your neighborhood. So these are the things that you can end up measuring to see how you're doing within the context of a campaign. If you don't really know how you're doing, going into election day, you've got predictive models, but it's all predictive. You know pretty accurately what you need to do in each of these areas to actually make the campaign run and be successful. So I wanted to take you through a little bit about how a campaign does that. So the first thing we do is they look at tons of maps and maps and maps. This is one for Polk County, Iowa. And what it's showing you are all the voter precincts. And what the campaign does is state by state across the country, they divide these areas up into the turfs that neighborhood teams will have, and those teams will be asked to canvass in that area and get people involved and engaged. This is a field office. It's a rather lovely one. This one's in Los Angeles. It's not representative of all field offices. Trust me, I've been to quite a few. I've been to field offices in the back of barbershops. I've been to field offices in small bungalows. In several states, like Montana, for example, a field office is actually a car. And the entire staff is handled by one person who basically drives around, and they go out and they meet people in parking lots, and they go out and canvass and phone bank. So if that's the field office, a little bit about what happens there is what we call a ladder of engagement. And this is a pretty traditional term in sort of nonprofits and political campaigns. And the idea is it's almost the reverse of a sales funnel, right? So the ladder of engagement is that the first step is you want to actually build awareness, right? So you want to get people involved and have them know a little bit about what we're doing in the campaign, why it's important for them to be involved. And you also want to get some information from them. So in this case, a phone number, an email, and a name. And note, this is 2012, and we're getting this in field offices by, taping posters to walls, right? This is part of why we actually got the technology team within house. The idea was that, while this is great, it's also really lossy, right? People lose emails, people either have to double enter this stuff. Maybe these people signed up for the wrong neighborhood team. They're actually not from Claremont, but they saw the piece of paper and wanted to get involved. So a lot of the systems that we built, the goal was to sort of marry those systems, those online systems, with the stuff happening offline in the communities. So we're being able to unify sort of both what people are doing on the internet and what they're doing in their hometown. So this is what we call a one-on-one. So the notion here is that once you've actually given somebody your information, that you actually sit down and you share a little bit about yourself, and they share a little bit about themselves, and you find commonality. And from that commonality, you find a way for you to move forward as part of a community. And the end of it is what's called a hard ask, right? So you actually ask the person, thank you for coming in and sharing your story. Can you show up at a phone bank on Tuesday at 7? No. Can you show up at the one on Wednesday at 7? No. Can you show up on Thursday at 3? And you just keep doing it until you can get them involved in some way. I mean, this actually is happening in New Mexico, and Deborah, the lady on the left there, is First American, and the lady on the right is actually a First American who lives on a reservation in northeast New Mexico. So she's got no phone, no landline. She shares a mobile phone with other people in her house. She has no internet connection. So this is far away from the world that I come from of online, social media, the whole bit. But our job was to help Deborah make sure that she got empowered to do what she had to do in her community to turn people out to vote. So once you get involved, this is what we ask you to do. So this is actually from Wisconsin. We have a bunch more. You'll note there's a lot of posters on walls with tape. The notion here is hey, this is what's in your packet. We give you a bunch of stuff, maps, voter ID facts, stuff that you can know about how you can actually get involved and vote today. And then a little bit about voting basics. So a little bit legally, just making sure volunteers are aware that, this is the way things run down. And once you've gone out and canvassed, you've got a little map like this. And so, here's your route outlined, and here's the appropriate houses for you to talk to. And so there's been a lot of questions about sort of big data and what big data meant in the campaign. Basically, here's how we knew who you should talk to. If you are registered, let's say today you decide that you want to run for public office, you would contact the California Secretary of State. They would give you a big file of everybody. Here's everybody who's registered to vote in your neighborhood. And what you really want is here's people who have voted according to your party and who are actually going to vote again, more likely than not. And so that's kind of how we would generate these lists. And so they would basically check these out and make them. One of the innovations that we did in 2012 was that we allowed you to take this thing and download it into your smartphone, and you could just sit there and update it right there. But in the meantime, you'd take your clipboard out and you'd go on your walk and you'd knock on people's doors and you'd talk with them about their need to vote and checking if they're registered, let them know where their polling place is. And then you would bring it back, and this poor soul would go through all those clipboards down below and data enter all the stuff that you had just accomplished. And that happened at location after location. This is New Hampshire. In this notion that we had, again, from the campaign, basically just right from the DNA of it itself, this is called the snowflake model. So the snowflake model of organizing means this. Every other campaign previous to the Obama campaigns had always said, you know, you can just kind of go out there and use traditional field organizing methods. And what those methods are like robocalls and paid volunteers and sort of a really outsourced, sort of mechanized way of actually connecting with people. The difference in 08 and 12 was that we used this snowflake model. So the idea was that you had a neighborhood team leader who was a volunteer who probably was there up to 20, maybe even 40 or 60 hours a week. That person had 4 other roles with them. A volunteer coordinator, which is just somebody kind of herding people, making sure they're all showing up. A canvas captain, so making sure people can knock on doors. A phone bank captain, organizing phone banks. And a data captain, who's, again, banging in all those numbers. In addition, and this was one of the really hard things that we had to model, is that you have here, I don't know if you can read it, there's Super Volunteer Mike over here. That's his title, Super Volunteer. There's the letter to the editor captain, and there's the phone banker extraordinaire. Because every one of these teams, you know, the idea is that it's a community effort. They don't have to actually have some kind of militarized hierarchical structure. They can do sort of whatever they want to do to get the job done. But the notion is that with this kind of base, you can then make sure that as people get engaged, there's a way for them to be sort of, you know, have that community form around that snowflake. And then in community after community, there's multiples. So here we are back again in New Mexico, and you can see there's 3 neighborhood teams all working different parts of, I believe that's Albuquerque, but I can't spell it. And one of the things that happened in 08 as well was that we saw increasing use of Facebook, and not just Facebook to do the traditional types of things you do on Facebook, like reach out and talk to your friends, but we saw people actually managing neighborhood teams. So this is the team Foothills Progressive Democrats, and they're organizing online, which on the one hand is awesome, and on the other hand is a little kind of skitsy, right? Like, why wouldn't the campaign actually provide stuff that could help them do their jobs, right? Like, instead of having them do this and use Google Docs and sort of cobble things together, like, the campaign knew how to do this stuff. Why couldn't we provide software for them to be able to do it? And so that's why they created a team of technologists. So the first day I showed up, this crazy drawing is a map of all the vendors and all the technology that we used, right? There are all these pre-existing relationships. So you've got the DNC and you've got different vendors and there's data flying all over the place and it's all, you know, crazy. And our job was to do this. So just make it really simple. So, you know, people have talked a lot about how this is sort of a big brothery moment, like they have this data about you, you know. But in reality, it was more of a user experience thing. What we wanted to do at the end of the day was make sure that you, the person online who gave money or posted things on Facebook or did whatever else, was also married to you, the person who voted, the person who attended events, and the person who gave money on their phone, right? And by knowing that, we were able to say things like, hey, you've been really engaged. Why don't you come into an event? Or, hey, you haven't been engaged yet. You know, here's some stuff that might be of interest to you to kind of, you know, get your attention. So a lot of that idea had been tried before, and it completely failed, right? So early on, I thought my job was, as a user experience person, was actually to pull teams of people together and talk about how we could build software in a more lean, iterative fashion. The campaign hadn't done iteration before. You know, previously, everything was driven by vendors and a very small team at the DNC of, you know, 4 or 5 developers trying to kind of hold it all together. And so when we showed up, it was a little bit tricky because people had been used to producing these giant specs and then having people under-deliver and deliver really slow. And they'd complain about it and then, all right, but you're good guys, you're progressive vendors and we like you, so all right, it's all good. So we show up and we're like, no, we're not doing that. We're not actually going to use specs. We're going to talk to people about what it is that they do. And we're going to do these participatory design sessions. So we had created some early personas based on interviews with some of the more committed volunteers who'd been around from the past. And we took those personas and we sat down with members of the tech team, the policy team, and the field organizing team. and said, hey, what do you need to know? And we asked them to impersonate different roles. If you were that neighborhood team leader, what do you need to know to manage your team more effectively? If you're a little bit further up the chain, you're in sort of the state management, what would you need to know? And if you're at the headquarters, how do things work for you? And a lot of this was really new, and it really pushed the boundaries of trust with the field people. They had known and had been really unhappy with vendors in the past, but it's like a bad marriage that they stayed in, right? It's like, oh, I totally know every move they're gonna make, and so I know, how it works, I've got the dynamic. And for us, they're like, really? You're gonna iterate. We're gonna make this thing and it's gonna be really crappy, and then the next week it's gonna still be crappy, but it's gonna be less crappy, and it's gonna keep moving and moving that way until we're ready to release it. Like, this is insane. Like, you don't release stuff like this. It's a presidential campaign, and it's an incumbent one. You only, release things when they're absolutely perfect and, in ship shape. That's how all the events were run. So it was a big leap of faith to have them kind of involved like this. And, to their credit, they stuck with it. We had an ace in our back pocket. That's our intern there on the right-hand side of the screen. Also happens to be the chairman of Google. So Eric showed up, and he was able to sort of work with people in leadership and say, look, what these guys are doing is right. What these women are doing is right. These people overall, they're a good team, and you should keep the faith with them. And it bought us a little bit of air cover, but at the same time, eventually we did have to ship because there is that election that only an act of Congress can move. These are some of the numbers for what we did. So I was on the campaign about 540 days. It was all 50 states. There's about 1,000 field offices. We had about 10,000 neighborhood team leaders. We had a couple million shifts. So in other words, volunteers showing up, doing a phone bank, doing a canvas, participating in some way. And we registered over 2 million voters. In 5 of the states, battleground states like Florida and Ohio, we registered more people than the margin of victory. So our efforts paid off. 150 million phone calls. In California, of course, you didn't get any of those. You made a lot of them. Thank you, California. This would be a very different talk if we were in Florida. And we launched, believe it or not, about 200 applications, which is a crazy amount to think of in 540 days. Now, some of those things were really tiny. They might have simply been a Python script that pulled a bunch of people who signed up in the website and said, hey, do you want to be involved? And just, it might not even have a UI, to things like the quick donate stuff that Christian mentioned earlier, where you could text in and put in your credit card information and you could start texting in donations. We made all sorts of crazy stuff. We made a media optimizer, knowing that we'd be outspent in the campaign. The media optimizer was a way for us to look at sort of media markets and figure out the biggest bang for our buck so that we were making our spends really effectively. Oddly enough, TV land late at night is the best place to reach voters, at least for us. Yeah. So we communicated a lot via cake. I can't. I'm not entirely sure why, but it's true. And we all felt, one of the DevOps guys, Scott Vandenplas, bought this cake actually right before the election. And in a place that cake disappeared fast, like really fast, right? You've got thousands of interns or hundreds of interns running around. Nobody cut this cake. I don't know if it's superstition or they thought like it was the cake. I don't know. But in any event, I mean, I've worked in a lot of high pressure places before, but I think we all felt an enormous amount of pressure to make sure what we did worked. I was the first UX person on a campaign, and so I felt a huge debt to my craft and also, just to the technology team in general. If we failed, there would not be another experiment like this, and ideally, we were hoping that some of the things that we did either got open sourced or, at least contributed in some way to this sort of discourse around, e-gov and, technology in politics. So we were all pretty aware that, the stakes were really high. Touch the screen. There we go. So I'll tell you a little bit about me, because I think people wonder, like, why are you the guy who's worried about fucking this up, right? Like, who are you? So this is where I'm from. This is my backyard, believe it or not. Not the moon. It's a little town called Marinette. Heard of it? Yeah, nuts. Really? Awesome. It's up there. So it's way north in Wisconsin. We're pretty much next to Canada, and we're basically covered with forest. My whole county's a forest preserve. This is my family. I'm the little chap with the bright eye right there. So my interest in politics, I'll tell you a little bit about myself here. It goes back to Carter, right? I remember what got dubbed as the malaise speech, but in reality, he never used the word malaise, right? He talked about how, overconsumption and self-indulgence were not roads to a better self or roads to a better community or a better politic, right? And at the end of the day, we elected a TV spokesperson to tell us that that was all bullshit. So, I was okay with that. This Apple II came out, and that fascinated me for like 10 years, It was an amazing thing to work on, and I got interested in graphics and UX and manuals and all sorts of things. Until my neighbor, Eugene Hasenfuss, I don't know if you're familiar with him, he's actually my neighbor, which is crazy, right? It's a strange world. Eugene worked for Air America, and he was actually illegally kicking weapons out of planes over Nicaragua for the Contras against the Sandinistas. So he's the guy that started off all of Iran-Contra, right? He was the bright link between Reagan and Casey, and anyway, that's the dude. And so it made me really wonder about, like transparency in government and whether politics and activism was something that shouldn't pay a little more attention to. So I moved to Chicago, became part of a band, ended up leaving the band, got married, had kids, worked at Orbitz, helped co-found Groupon, did a whole bunch of stuff, started running a consultancy. Life was good. It was donating to the campaign, but and I did get out the vote type volunteering it for Kerry and for the president. But on election day, I was actually working at my consultancy. I was flying on a plane from Chicago. I still live there today. I was flying out here to work with a client. And so they announced it on the plane, which is pretty awesome. But I wasn't in Grant Park. Things really took a turn for me. This is my daughter Vivian in the hospital. She was born about 3 months premature. And we're in the hospital one day, and I get a call at home. It's about 4:30 on a Friday. You misfilled your paperwork, and if you don't fax in this form with a doctor's signature by 5 o'clock, you're going to owe the entire bill. It's about $500,000. Right? So I'm sitting here thinking to myself, wait a minute. Like, we got it, by the way. My wife was at the hospital. It happened to be rounds. She cornered a nurse and was like, oh my God, I need a fax machine immediately. And we got the form in, right? But here we are, people who, we have good careers, we have good jobs, we have health insurance, yet this is what we're facing. And I'm sitting here watching all this stuff about death panels, right? And here we go, There's no need for a death panel. She's fine, by the way. That's her. Thank you. But, right about the time she got to the hospital, it was when Citizens United got passed, right? These are pierogies. Bit of a non sequitur. Amen, brother. So my family comes together, 4 generations of my family, to make pierogies all the time. And so this is my mom, my gram, my sis. About 7 months after this photo was taken, my mom had an aneurysm, and we had to take her off life support. That was it. So, sorry. Sorry, it's taking me a minute. Nearly 1,000 people showed up to her memorial, and it showed me the value of community. So here I am afterwards. I turned 40 right after her memorial, and we, celebrated her life, and I jumped in the river. And I swam back out, and I realized things had changed for me, right? I was running a design firm. We had a bunch of great clients, and I could have cared less. I'm sitting there thinking to myself, am I really here to make, oh my God, Pop have better games, or to make Threadless sell more shirts? I like their shirts, don't get me wrong. But, it seemed like there was more. So one day I showed up at a local VC to give what I thought was a design 101 to a startup. This is why design's important. This is why you need a design co-founder, yada, yada. And instead, it was actually Michael Slaby, this fellow right here, note the elbow patches. He came from the campaign, and he was there to recruit Harper Reid, myself, Dylan Richards, Scott Van de Plas, and Aaron Salmon. Why us? Because we had worked on the Rahm Emanuel transition site, and we also knew this really crazy, like Blackwater, like just crazy right-wing guy named Jason Rexilius. He's a really nice guy, but I totally disagree with his politics. But in any event, Slaby was hunting around for people in Chicago that actually had a background in community activism, and I did because I worked on The Point. And so anyway, Rexilius and the mayor of Chicago were like, you should hire these guys, and so he made the pitch. So I took a like 70% pay cut and signed up to basically do the re-election. And at that point, you know, people really thought that the president was kind of DOA. We knew he'd be outspent. We also felt like there was a pretty strong possibility that, you know, if unemployment stayed as high as it was, there was no chance he'd actually have re-election. So it was not the most popular decision you could make in my household, but it seemed like the right thing to do. And, you know, it was. I mean, that was the result, right? We won, and I'd like to tell you a little bit about how that came to be during this talk. So what I just told you is called the story of self. Right? That's my story of self. It's how I came to the campaign. It's part of an organizing technique for community organizing that's got kind of a three-part component. So the first part is the story of self, and it contains three things: a challenge, a choice, and the outcome, right? So I just told you mine. In a typical story of us, what I would do is I'd ask you to tell me your story of self. And we would figure out how that made the two of us a community, how we can work together, what it is about our backgrounds, no matter how remote, that somehow tie us together. And we'll use that to actually talk about the story of now. And the story of now is all about, there we go, how we can take action, right? What has to happen in our community to move our community forward. So it's part of an organizing methodology. It's taught by, you know, a famous community organizer named this guy, it's Marshall Gans. So the president actually learned a lot of these techniques from Gans. Gans is a famous organizer, and he works at the Kennedy School. And so I bring this up because my job, what I thought my job was, it turned out wasn't actually my job. I thought my job was to do user experience and design strategy for a campaign. As a matter of fact, you know, we pretty much knew what the whole deal was, right? There was a huge technical debt of decades of wish lists, desires, and dreams that all the political folks had in terms of how you could engage or how you could make things better. What I thought was my job turned out not to be my job. I ended up doing a lot of basic triage, right? We worked more like a MASH unit than actually like a design strategy shop. There wasn't much time for strategy because you only have 18 months, 540 days. So what I ended up doing looked a lot more like this. I was in the diplomacy and consensus department. You have people with every type of viewpoint under the sun as far as how stuff should be built. And it was basically my job to help do diplomacy and consensus. And I used the community organizing techniques from the field operation to organize the campaign itself. So one of the first people that I got to hop aboard was this fellow right here. His name's Dave Castleton. He volunteered for the campaign for 9 months as a UX practitioner. Dave did everything from usability testing to interviewing people. What he's showing me here is his amazing excitement at seeing yet another printout of an Excel spreadsheet for yet another neighborhood team in yet another state that does things slightly differently than everybody else. We spend a lot of time combing through these things over and over again. This fellow right here is a guy named Scout Addis. He happens to be right there. Aside from the Nerf gun and the whiskey, what Scout provided was veteran leadership. Again, if this is sort of a MASH unit and suddenly my job is to help get consensus amongst various parties, what Scout did was be able to come in and look at whatever piece or problem you had at any given time and make it better, whether that was copywriting or conversion. I won't give you the secret sauce for how he did this, but he upped conversion on the contribution form online for online donations by 11% with one change, which startled the entire team. They retested and retested. They're like, this can't be right. But it was, because he's great. This right here, this startled looking fella, is Mark Trammell. He's right there. What Trammell did was he helped out a ton with all sorts of stuff. I mean, first of all, with onboarding people into the site where we had quite a bit of problems, just because we had a lot of different viewpoints on how it would be the right way to effectively engage our different audiences. But he also helped work out with all the social media team, like how the best way to produce content, the best way to actually work with Twitter, to get good value from that. In addition, and there's like a lot of names up here, Christian was awesome. So I talked with Dana Chisnell, who does a lot of the field guides for voter intent and for ballot design. And I'm like, hey, we need help badly. At this point, we're starting to release stuff across the country. We have no travel budget, and we're doing all kinds of usability testing, like over Skype and all these crazy things. And guess what? Like 55-year-old women from Detroit are not really great at Skype, believe it or not. They can't sign up for your website, but just use Skype to tell us why. It seems a little, a little tricky, So what we did was, through Christian, he introduced us to a bunch of great folks, some of whom are here tonight, like Julie and Andrea, and basically these people helped us coordinate a nationwide network of usability practitioners and volunteers. And so the same type of community organizing that worked for people in the field, hey, guess what? It works for user experience people as well. So these folks helped us by going into various field offices and doing all sorts of testing on some of the stuff we were launching. We'll talk about that in a sec. These fine folks, it was really dark. This is the dashboard support team organized by Brady Chris. So our entire support team, we didn't have a call center, and you can't outsource anything out of the United States anyway, right? And we couldn't actually afford to have a call center because being a political campaign, nobody ever thought you'd need to support software, but they knew they needed it built. So we ended up organizing a bunch of volunteers. So a lot of the gals here are actually college students. Averill up there is a high school student. So they would come in on weekends and after school, and they would help us out. And it allowed us to do all the traditional sort of UX methodology stuff. So we started mapping out sort of the ladder of engagement and figuring out for all the different things that people did, what made sense for what people. Because we didn't have a lot of prior experience in terms of working with politics, one of the weird things about a political campaign overall is that we're there for 18 months. 80% of the work gets done in the last 2 months. So when you show up, you're trying to test, but bless you, but you don't have any users, right? There's nobody to actually test with because there's nobody who's actually volunteering 18 months ahead of time. There's a couple of staffers who are like, oh yeah, 4 years ago I did this. It's like, oh, that's really fascinating, but not helpful. So we looked at a lot of other sites to see what they did. Again, we're kind of like in a hallway here filled with chairs because press was freaked out that we would actually put things on walls. Like, why would you ever think of doing that? When I joined the campaign, we had a bunch of balsamic licenses. No offense, I don't want to get in a religious war, but I'm not a big balsamic fan. I am especially not a balsamic fan after the story I'm about to tell you. Eric Schmidt was great because he came on a fairly regular basis and he consistently reinforced his messaging, right? So in other words, he came, he told us what he thought about our progress or how we were doing, he gave us helpful advice, and he moved on. Other people weren't always quite as helpful. Ed Tufte stopped by. I have a tremendous amount of respect for Mr. Tufte, let me be clear. But he stopped by the campaign and it was kind of a last minute thing, and so we go in and they're like, hey, why don't you show him some wireframes? Like, really? You want me to show this to Ed Tufte? All right, and these charts are made up, right? Like, this is just something put here just for there to be a there, right? We have no clue if this is right, and so we do this, and he was the nicest gentleman until he saw this. And he turned to me and said, why would you design for children? I'm like, oh, no, sir, this is a wireframe. Like, this, we don't mean to, why would you make it intentionally ugly? I'm like, oh, sir, it's, why would you design a graph like this? So it got a little rough. If there was value to be had there, my team was impressed that I could take a beating and just keep on moving on, which is a very valuable trait in that domain. This is one of our first usability tests in the office itself. As you can tell from the reaction of the developer. It's going about how usability tests typically do. You know, it was really interesting seeing how, you know, you've got people from all these different cultures on our team as well coming together. So like Gabriel Burt there is an amazing developer. He worked on a bunch of Linux systems. I don't think any of them ever had a user interface. So suddenly he's the guy building the consumer web product. And let's just say it was a tough readjustment. This is Iowa, where they have roughly the same reaction that Gabriel was having, as they were the first people to use our software. We piloted in all 50 states, so we started state by state and rolled it out slowly. New Mexico and Iowa were two of the first states that we went with because they had really advanced field programs. So this is the time where I tell you the most embarrassing thing that's ever happened to me in terms of user experience. We made a user cry. Yes, yes. So when the rollout happened, the state staff basically told people the only way you can contribute to the campaign from now on is through this screen. Like, this will be your touch point. This is the system. Because, you know, again, there's kind of a network effect as it goes down the hierarchy, and somewhere they thought that was the right message. When in truth, you know, the idea was if you could use it, great. If you couldn't, you could do what this gentleman's doing, and you use a buddy system, right? So like somebody else can use the computer and you can do whatever it is, because the golden rule at a field office is you always are valuable, right? Whatever it is you can do. There are people who come into field offices, all that they do is they show up with tasty food, and their official title is comfort captain, right? You know, so he obviously was not as happy, and we talked to that woman and made sure she was okay, but the team took it really hard. So we hit the road, and we kept coming back out and talking to people about what it was that worked well for them. So this was a really interesting group because this entire group represented a lot of our demographic. Though you can't see everybody there, we basically have two striations. You've got folks 18 to 25 who are either taking a year off from college or they're just out of school, and that's one group predominantly using mobile devices. They may not have ever owned a desktop. They may own a laptop, but they may be as likely to own a tablet. And then you've got a group like the folks more at this table here, 55 and up, for the most part female, you know, well-educated. Typically, they're either empty nesters or they're people who've always been involved in their community, school teachers, you know, a lot of ladies who help organize things like, you know, churches and stuff like that. So it's a pretty unique demographic to design for. So one of the things that we did to make it easy for both groups was design tiles. So we basically tried to figure out all these different ways for you know, this stuff to look. And this was sort of the end product. So the notion was that this thing collapsed down responsively, thanks to the work of folks like Dan Ryan right here in the front. We had a responsive design framework that actually was out before Twitter's. And the notion was that this worked well on a cell phone and it worked well on a desktop, so you could sort of serve both audiences. Again, a lot of what we did in the fly. So, you know, you're used to sort of the traditional process flow that's well thought out and documented because you're going to need to actually refer back to that thing at some point and make additions or changes based on, you know, what you've learned about sort of user behavior. In campaigns, you don't have the luxury of time. Everything happens in the real world, and everything happens like while your hair's on fire, right? So there's, you know, 10 different crazy things happening, and you're like, oh, we need to redesign this flow. So you do things like this, and it actually helped democratize the process a lot, because you could just, instead of being the person who's designing at the screen and sort of saying, I own this process and now I will share it out with other people, you're able to grab the person from the field team and the person from the digital team and all these different people who are wandering by or whatever else and saying, hey, let's work this out. So here on the side, we've got sort of conversion numbers, and then we've got sort of this, you know, crazy path that we're looking at and trying to figure out, oh, well, hey, maybe if we remove the one with the big X, you know, we can avoid some drop-off. But you're doing these things this way, and it's actually helping out a lot because you're getting visual. You're getting stuff happening in front of whiteboards and in corners of offices. And, you know, at the end of the day, it was successful, right? You know, people started putting signs like this up in field offices. So we knew that it was having an impact. We knew that people were actually buying into what we were doing, and we were seeing the numbers, you know, go up accordingly. You know, as a result of that, we were able to get the president to do a video address to all of our volunteers on Dashboard. So this was something that people had talked about in '08 because they had way more money than they knew what to do with. You know, if you remember, in '08, they bought the big ad buy for the president to sort of go on TV and just talk. We didn't have that kind of money this time. We knew we were going to be outspent, but we found other ways to reach people that were engaged. So what we did was we had weekly meetings online where basically the president, Jim Messina, Marlon Marshall, Jeremy Bird, some of the field people talked about the importance of volunteer action, talked about what it meant to get out the vote or whatever the program was that particular week. And he also talked about how it was to sort of be in the campaign itself, I guess. So this this is from Ars Technica. It's fairly spectacular. People have talked a lot about Orca versus Narwhal. So Narwhal was our data store. Orca was the Romney campaign's system that they thought was similar. It was a get out the vote system that they used on election day. Their system failed spectacularly. Ours worked. Ours worked in part because of volunteers like Julie and Andrea going out to field offices and making sure that the stuff we were launching actually worked and worked well for people, and they were actually able to enter their data. That Orca project, all schadenfreude aside, might have cost Romney the election because they did not get the turnout that they were expecting in a lot of key states, and we won all those states. So not too bad. I'll wrap it up because I know I'm over time. What made all this stuff work? What made community organizing bring people together and sort of get the job done? One thing was just finding good people, no matter what they did, and doing good things and working with them. This lady's named Anthea Watson. She's over at the Google Civic team now. She was one of the field organizers from '08 and '12 that really helped out early on, sort of teaching these principles. Another quick thing, celebrate the little victories. So it's JP ringing a bell. We did that every time we raised $1 million, so it happened a lot. But you had to let people like JP, who's in DevOps, and nobody even knew his name, you have to let him ring the bell too, right? Everybody's got to celebrate the victory. You've got to get everybody in. And you've got to do it, as I mentioned, with cake. That was for when we went to production. Yes, with cake. You've got to stay focused. One of the things... Stuff happens, it's a campaign. One of the things that we talked about a lot was just, even if a marching band happens to show up in the office one day, you need to stay focused on what it is that you're doing. You need to stay focused on that day, and you need to stay focused on, doing your job, because it's going to be your turn in the barrel, right? We got our turn when the president didn't do so well in that first debate, and everybody was like, oh my God, they're screwing it up. And it's like, yep, but we're just going to do what we're doing. We're going to execute our plan, and our plan is grounded in our values, and so we're going to rock it, and we did. One of the last things is have fun, right? This is a fellow named Abi. When we went to 7-day weeks, Abi took a nap at his desk one day, and we could have publicly harangued him. How dare you sleep? The election's on the line. But instead, we took pictures and photoshopped him into this photo of Justin Bieber, and then distributed that to the entire campaign. Same thing here. Ian Dees is getting upset because there's a TV cameraman behind him, which happened a lot, and it would freak people out. You have to kind of take whatever is on your screen off and hide stuff just in case of whatever. And so you can react to that in a really negative way and be like, oh, you're disturbing me. Or you can just have fun with it and take a picture of the guy taking a picture of your coworkers. And finally, sort of, the value of community is immeasurable. We were a campaign focused on metrics and really dedicated to this notion that you can measure all this stuff. But at the end of the day, actually having community both within the campaign, it made things so much easier. When we first started, it was impossible to get anything done without a war, right? You would just sit there and you'd go toe-to-toe with people, and you're like, I don't know why you're so angry. I've worked in a lot of places, but I don't get why you're a very angry person. And by building community and using community organizing techniques, you started to break down those barriers, and you understood where other people were coming from. You understood those motivations, and by understanding, your motivation is you're a politico. You want to get a job out of here. So this irrational thing that you're saying makes total sense because you're protecting your career. And so the irrational thing that I'm saying about how like it'd be good to take the fundraising thing off the homepage, which was something that Julie found and it was a totally legitimate thing to say. Like I'm saying that because I'm here to serve the users. And so, you know, between the two of us, we can figure out balance. So that's that. Couple final things, stop complaining and do something. If you don't like the way things are going, Organizing for Action is my little pitch. I'm not affiliated, but the campaign is still running, and it's running to help the president's agenda, and they're looking for volunteers. And if there's one thing that I've seen from my time in the campaign, they certainly can use the types of people that are in this room tonight. And that's true of really almost any type of nonprofit or NGO that's out there. They are woefully underserved by technology in a way that's, you know, kind of heartbreaking because these people are sitting there. You know, that guy with the clipboards, he's still probably entering data, right? And the election's been over for 4 months. So anything you can do to help would be great. And that's it. Thank you.
Great talk. Besides the orca versus narwhal, what do you think the next election will bring when both sides probably learn the lessons that you have? And I mean, I'm just kind of curious, and like, what happens to the organizational trajectory?
Sure. So 2012 is an outlier, right? Because it's this election, the shape of this election won't happen again for 8 more years. There won't be an incumbent president sitting in 2016 who's running. On the other hand, you know, we do know that things were changed by the shape of this election. I think one of the things that changed was for us, we were an internal team. So, and you can find all this in the FEC filings. We cost about $10 million, right, in terms of everything, people, software, the whole bit. We deployed everything in the cloud, and we basically lived and died and sweated with the campaign. The Romney campaign relied for the most part on vendors. They spent about $14 million more and their technology underperformed. So I think some of the things that you'll see would be, you know, again, an emphasis on big data. So trying to basically tie together, you know, profiles of people and not in some creepy like fashion or like, you know, maybe as advanced as something like an organization like Target would do. But just this notion that like, you know, actually being able to connect the person who did canvassing with the person who has an account online would be a good thing to do. I think, you know, overall, you know, seeing that kind of keep on progressing. We didn't touch a lot on some of the social media stuff that we did, but you know, asking people to put in their social graph and then ask their friends to vote. We reached out almost to the entire country that way. It was a pretty broad reach. And as you saw in the polling, like the Nate Silver polling showed you, you know, basically reaching people by landline was a bad indicator of how the actual electorate would perform. Looking at how things happened online, there was a much clearer indication of sort of where the action was. I think that'll continue.
Hi. It's amazing that you were able to do UX on 200 apps and in this really short amount of months that you had. The corporate world where I live a lot of the time, a usability test or other types of user research might take a month for one app. So I'm wondering, with something, let's say like usability, getting feedback on the apps that you put out there, and so you can iterate them on, for the next version, how did you compress that into such a short time scale?
Sure. So there's a couple different approaches. So for some of the longer scale development stuff, dashboard, the public website, things like that, you had like weekly A/B testing that was performed. So we sort of knew where the pain points were. And a lot of times, like as a UX person, I was more a triage person. And so having people like Scout and Trammell there was really effective because you could have a senior person come in and go, oh, this is your problem? Okay, let's grab the whiteboard, and in 20 minutes, we're gonna hack out some solutions. Or if I can't do it that fast, I'm gonna take it back to my desk, and in an hour, I'll turn it back around, and I'll tell you, like, this is where things can go. So this is why I say it's a lot more like a MASH unit than, like, you know, what we're typically used to, sort of design as strategy, service design, all the sort of, you know, let's look at this holistically and build pieces. You're working in the opposite direction. It's almost more like lean UX, and what you're trying to do is make all these small pieces loosely joined, and use things like pattern libraries and sort of shared experience across apps so that you're not redesigning the same thing in two different places. And so we did that, and we used GitHub to store all of our stuff. And so, depending on the size of the effort and what the problem was, either you got a drawing on the back of a piece of paper or a whiteboard that you took a photo of and ran with. You got maybe sometimes a graphic design comp if it needed like comping. If it was something that we could potentially kill or move forward, we'd spend a day and make a prototype using like Bootstrap and just kind of scrapping things together to see if the interaction worked. But it was all very triaged.
Mm-hmm. And what about on the evaluation side to inform the triage decisions and the feature design decisions?
Sure.
You mentioned A/B testing. Any qualitative?
A/B testing, we did qualitative. Folks like Julie and Andrea used Ethnio. So we used Ethnio on the website, did live intercept captures. We did the same thing in field offices. So we would ask people, how things were working there. We'd also use what were called maestro calls, which is sort of a controlled conference experience. And so we would ask people to use stuff, and then we'd have weekly calls that anybody within the hierarchy, like structurally in the field organization, could get on and say, this is how this worked or not. And then for internal stuff, we would just watch people use stuff and, identify sticking points, give some best practices, kind of real time, and go from there.
Thanks.
Sure. Yes?
How will you change your approach to user experience moving forward from working on the Obama campaign?
Oh gosh, that's a good question. I'm a big believer in two things, I guess. I really like service design, and I like the notion of sort of having a holistic set of opinions about sort of how things should go beforehand. The fact that we didn't have one in the campaign reinforced even more the need for that type of thing. I think the other thing is I got more and more comfortable being looser and looser with stuff. So I used to be a big like omnigraphal guy, or a big fan of like having the well thought out process flow, right? Because like as a professional services firm, you want pretty documents. But just doing the pen and ink sketches, right? Sitting somewhere in a corner for an hour, you could get someplace far better. And I think that was more value, right? Just having it be throwaway.
Having seen firsthand how technology changes elections and the landscape of it, what are your thoughts on moving voting to completely online, or just having an online aspect for voting?
Yeah, I think it'd be awesome. I mean, right now we don't have a lot of states that even allow online registration. I think Nevada is maybe the only one. There might be like one other one. One of the funny things about elections overall is that the actual counties and states are responsible for funding and providing the apparatus for polling places. So, but I do agree with like what the president said on Reddit, that it needs to change. If you look at, like Panama, for example, you don't have to register to vote in Panama, right? You just show up with an ID and you vote because everybody can, right? And if you don't have an ID, like you still vote. That level of transparency or like just directness, I think would be welcome here. We still don't have a lot of the electorate voting. Yes?
I was really curious about if you could share the example you mentioned where the conversion just jumped 12%, and some of the other like viral marketing loops or strategies, some UX design philosophies that you use on your homepage to increase conversion and basically getting people to open their wallet and donate. Can you share some of the insight that startups can use, or we can use?
Sure. I mean, the 11%, that's a big walleye. That one I'm going to hold off on just because I think that could be used by other folks to try to do the same thing. I'll say this, you can optimize experience and you can optimize like interaction, but at some point you really need to think of context. So in our case, like what brought somebody there? Why did they show up in the first place, right? And so the same thing's true of all the content that we put out in the campaign. You design things for shareability, which means, thinking about, what would make you share something? What would make you open your wallet? It's not the fact that the form is better, like the interaction on the form is better. It's the fact that it actually connects to the greater purpose in your life, right? This is the thing about sort of like community organizing in general, right? Maybe I didn't spell it out enough here, but we know like up to a point in income, you get happiness along with income, right? I'm making more money, I've got a better place to live, I got a nicer car, I can eat wherever, et cetera. And then it taps off, right? And what actually makes you happier is connection to a greater purpose, right? And so for us, it was all about those types of things, and being able to share something, experience something, and feel like the campaign was something that you were a part of. And Christian mentioned seeing the paths to victory piece. That was a really shareable piece because it included you in what we were doing. We got the president on dashboard because it showed that dashboard was legitimate in the eyes of volunteers and that he cared that they were actually spending their nights and weekends pounding the pavement for him. So connecting with those greater purposes that are driving your users helps them do the things that you need them to do for you to thrive.
Do you think your experience with the presidential campaign is transferable to other community organizing campaigns? What would it take for climate change type drive or healthcare innovation?
Mm-hmm. Sure, it's a great question. I do. I mean, I think the principles that like Marshall Gans lays out they're really solid principles, right? And I think in terms of connecting both people to each other and people to causes that impact their communities, I think those are really direct things. I think 350.org, the Bill McKibben organization, is doing really interesting things with digital, trying to reach out to people in similar ways. I think a lot of the stuff that we did hopefully is broadly transferable. That's where my interest lies, in trying to take some of those techniques to help out other civil society organizations.
Why isn't there more of this happening?
I think it's kind of the last area of disruption, right? I mean, it's like, in general, working in politics from a technology point of view, it's not like where the easy money is, right? It's where like, it's where the super high pressure, super low dollar, like really hard stuff is done. But, so like when you came to the campaign, I mean, you saw it, it felt like the 90s, right? It felt like what disrupting online banking or online travel felt like 20 years ago. Like people were just, their minds were blown by some of the stuff we did. And for us, it wasn't like single sign-on, really? Like that's an amazing thing. We've all seen this, right? And we describe it to people and they're like, oh, that's, and then they would come to us and they'd be like, I signed on to this thing and then I was signed into this thing. And we're like, yeah, we've been saying that for a year. Like you didn't, oh, okay, well, that's why you were so angry. I think there's like a lot of stuff with like Code for America and things like that you're starting to see, that change, right? People are getting involved in civic tech and in civic engagement in a way that's hopefully, more meaningful and more helpful. Because I mean, it's easy to beat up on the vendors and, say, oh, they didn't know what they were doing or whatever. They did. They know what they're doing. They're just traditionally underfunded and they're stretched out and they can't always pay market wages compared to, like a Google or a Facebook, right? So like the people who work there for a while and then they get burned out and they go somewhere else. And so it's a tough nut to crack. Hopefully it'll change.
Do you see a public-private partnership helping this along?
It'd be lovely, yeah. I mean, I think, I think there's models coming out now, things like B Corps and things like that have a different set of metrics than just a pure profit motive. And I think that's helpful. Thank you. Yes?
I'm going to try and squeeze in two related questions into one, so take either A or B or both.
Okay.
All politics is local, I guess, but I'd be curious about your perspective of the national political kind of campaign that you were working on versus the sort of differences with local. And then I kind of want this one too. I'll see if I can squeeze it in somehow. But I think about Lawrence Lessig and a lot of his idea of that is just fundamental. The entire campaign infrastructure is so tweaked that there's no way, with the root strikers and all that, there's no way that the electoral system is going to work if you don't get at the root, basically. So I'm not sure if I can work that back into the local versus national, but either one.
Sure. So local versus national, I mean, that's an interesting one. Like we hoped a lot of the stuff that we had made would be open sourced. And I think, people get really upset about this or angry, like, oh, it should be open source. But we built stuff that was very specifically for a national political, like a re-election campaign, right? And so there's a lot of assumptions and factors built into that. And there's the needs at those two levels are extremely different, and even the relationships with people are really different. So the vendors that work really well at the local level are the ones that get really stretched when it's at the national level, because they're used to that smaller scale, right? But I do think a lot of politics, yeah, it is local, right? I mean, the Republicans ginned up all the state houses, and that's how they can do voter suppression on a national scale. So it's definitely, there's a relationship between the two. As far as the root strikers stuff goes, like, yeah, I think like me personally, not me as part of a campaign, yeah, I think there's a lot to that. At the same point, like, one of the reasons why I made the decision that I did was because, you know, the demographics of this country are changing. And this was one of the last shots that Republicans would have, where they had Citizens United and they had a lot of people who were interested in pouring money into a campaign. And their big experiment, like if ours was investing in field and technology and kind of keeping your powder dry and spending it smartly, theirs was, we're going to carpet bomb the shit out of the electorate, and we're going to see if we can just buy this thing. And the answer was no, right? They funded, you look at, you know, Karl Rove's group, they funded 5 Senate elections and Romney, and they lost in all 6 of those elections. So, you know, I think it was a bit of a watershed that way too. Yes?
So during the election, you wrote a bunch of software, and now the election's over. What has become of that software, or what will become of it?
So it's transferring slowly to a new organization called Organizing for Action, which is, so the campaign is done, it's folded. The group that was the campaign, Organizing for America, or Obama for America, pardon me, it's done. So slowly, with lawyers and things I don't entirely understand, that is transferring over to Organizing for Action, which will have a different corporate structure, which will be, like, technically it's a lobbying group, but really any activity where you're telling Congress to do something different is a lobbying activity. So like you calling your congressperson, you're lobbying your congressperson. They're going to use a lot of that same software to try to motivate and engage people around things like gun control, climate change, and the things the president is probably talking about right now.
Got one more question about, this is just regarding all this money that these politicians raise, like hundreds of millions of dollars, like
Yeah.
you mentioned $10 million for your budget. And, you know, that's like, I've heard, like, during one trip to the Bay Area, Obama, you know, he can raise more than that easily. And then they have all these other corporations they establish, which, you know, get funded. So where does all that money go? Like, I mean, if technology it's so important, like, why are you guys so funded? And where is that majority of the money going? Where does it get spent?
There's a private island in the middle of the Pacific. Actually, I mean, so honestly, a ton of that, a metric ton of that goes into television ads, like a vast majority. I mean, so for us, we were sort of the canaries in the coal mine. So, you know, if $10 million got you some power in terms of it changed the nature of the race, and we were able to engage people in a new way, that proves in later campaigns that somebody else will have to invest money in that more. But, I mean, it's a huge leap of faith. Like, the president, Messina, everybody in that team, like that slide where I have the president looking at my demo, okay, I'll tell you the truth, that's not really a demo. He's looking at a screensaver of my daughter's, right? And so when we're talking about the fact that we both have daughters, because he comes out of the conference room, so he was only at the campaign like 3 times total. He comes out of the conference room, he's like, what's this? What's this area? And everybody in my entire team goes, this is technology, sir. He's like, oh, what are you all doing here? Like, we're working on dashboard. Nothing, right? It's not in his daily briefing. Like, he's like worried about, like, you know, the world, right? And so I'm like, it's the social media platform for your volunteers online. Oh, you have 2 girls. Yes, I do, sir. You have 2 girls. You know, it's a different scale. So, so they you know, they had a lot of faith in us to figure out that these dudes with beards and had a huge stash, that these guys would actually, and the women on the team would actually come together and deliver something for them. We proved it, and hopefully now it'll move things forward for the next gen.
I heard you mention open sourcing the code, and is the feeling that other competitive campaigns wouldn't use it because their tactics would be different? Or why would you want to kind of give away something that, or expose it to potential competitors?
Totally. So that's a great question. So me as a person, not as part of the campaign, I'm a strong believer in open source software. Right? We used a lot of open source software to actually build a lot of what we did. Some of that stuff we did open source. So things like voter registration. Like our opinion again is, hey, we're expanding the electorate. This fits with our mission. This fits with our values. Like if we happen to register Republicans, that's just going to be flack that we're going to take because we want people to get engaged, period. Yeah, some of the other stuff, this is a huge debate. Like, does all this stuff, you know, and you can look at, you know, the different stuff we built, payment processing software. Sure, you could, that's pretty value neutral. Like anybody could use that thing, right? But things like dashboard or things where you actually had people trying to get engaged in neighborhood teams, you know, you're sort of building the Obama belief system into software. You're kind of building campaign OS. And yeah, I don't think that would have worked for Romney. I mean, at one point, we were hearing reports Romney was like, you know, outsourcing stuff to call centers because he couldn't get volunteers to backfill his stuff. So like, it's a different model for how the, you know, you approach things. So yeah, but not up to me. That's for lawyers and for the campaign.
So who decided that? Who originally decided that they needed a team like yours in the Obama campaign? Like, how did somebody get that brilliant notion?
Sure. So in 08, they knew that things were, they knew that technology was having a huge impact, right? So in 08, pretty much everybody was like, oh, Hillary's got this, right? She's got the bundlers. It's game over. This is big money ball politics. She's won this. And the president secured the nomination basically through small donors contributing mostly online, right? And it blew people's minds. So they're like, okay, this is great, but a lot of the systems weren't that reliable because nobody had actually tried that stuff at scale. So when they looked at people like the people on our team, we'd all worked at places where we'd had millions of users and we'd seen systems get hammered under load. And they're like, oh, we need people like that who keep tuning these things and iterating them because, you know, if we keep on relying on these other people, it's just going to be a bit of a bad scene. So they decided, I think like Messina and I believe the president himself decided that this would be something that they would invest in. Yeah.
And also, is your email JD Kunesh?
Oh, yeah, sorry, it's off the, yeah. JD Kunesh, yeah, it's that thing.
I figured it must be, but
Yeah.
I actually wrote it down wrong the first time. So.
Oh, sorry. Hi.
Hi. I want to say thank you so very much.
Oh, thank you.
I worked out.
Thank you.
I worked out at the San Jose field office mostly for the last 4 months. And it was an amazing experience. You brought people together across such a wide variety of demographics, from people of my age who rebelled against Dashboard just a little bit. I've got to say that.
That's fair.
But we had the young'uns who tutored us and made us eventually feel comfortable. And I think that there had been a craving for many years for people who felt marginalized in political life, and to have a campaign and a user experience that really emphasized values and the American spirit. And I know it was kind of crazy, and we all said, why are we doing this weekend after weekend to make sure? And then when Orca croaked, then we said, that's why. That's why.
Thank you.
But thank you so much for all of your work.
Right back at you. Thank you. I mean, it was my privilege, you know, honestly. I was very lucky to have been a part of it, and field offices were the best place to be. I spent a lot of time in them, and you guys were doing all the hard work. I mean, seriously, it's, you know, we went through a lot at HQ, but it was a lot trickier to see people in the field. Like the amount of time that they spent and the work that they did it's humbling. Thank you.
And we did it.
Yes, we did. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for coming, and let's have one last big hand for Jason.